My journalistic career had ended in disgrace. A botched exposé costing me my job, my reputation, and pretty much every bridge I'd ever built. The dreams of breaking the next big story had dissolved into a mountain of debt and a bitter taste in my mouth. The only lifeline I'd found was a cryptic, handwritten flyer tacked to a damp bulletin board in a forgotten town. Caretaker needed. Harrow's End train station. Inquire within. Desperate, I'd driven until my car groaned in protest, until the asphalt gave way to cracked, overgrown roads. It was my last stop, a plunge into the absolute unknown. Harrow's End wasn't much of a town anymore. It was a ghost, really. Its once bustling streets now swallowed by weeds, its buildings crumbling, their empty windows like vacant eyesores staring out at nothing. The air itself felt heavy with decay, a silent testament to forgotten lives. The train station itself was a grand Gothic structure, its brickwork stained a deep mottled brown with age and damp. Towering arched windows, many shattered and boarded, reflected the bruised twilight sky in fractured shards. The wind, a constant mournful presence, whistled through broken panes, carrying the chilling sound of rattling loose metal and creaking timbers. I pushed open a heavy wooden door that groaned in protest, a sound like a tortured breath. The air inside was cold and damp, smelling of dust, mildew, and something else. Something metallic and sharp, like old dried blood. A thin, elderly man, his face a roadmap of sorrow and exhaustion, sat hunched over a flickering, oil-stained lantern behind a counter that looked like it belonged in a museum. His eyes, the color of faded denim, were fixed on me with an unsettling stillness. "You the new one?" he asked, his voice a dry rasp, barely audible above the wind's howl. "Yes, sir," I managed, feeling the deep chill seep into my very bones. "Ethan Reed." He nodded slowly, a single weary gesture. "My name's Orrin. This station, it holds many stories, Mr. Reed. Some of them aren't for sharing. Some of them, they hold you." He gestured with a trembling hand towards a small, grimy office tucked away behind the main waiting area. "Your duties are simple. Keep the waiting room clean. Check the tracks. Keep the records. Just listen to the echoes, son, and they'll tell you what they need." The office was cramped, filled with the ghosts of forgotten schedules and faded, curling posters advertising destinations that no longer existed. On a scarred wooden desk, a worn, leather-bound ledger lay open, its pages thick and yellowed, filled with looping, spidery script. Orrin pointed to it. "Every station master before you has kept this book. Departures, arrivals, anything unusual. This station, it knows more than we do." I flipped through a few pages. Most entries were mundane, recording repair dates, coal deliveries, and infrequent passenger counts. But interspersed were unsettling notations, scrawled in different hands, some precise, some frantic. Faint whistle, 0200, no train visible. Just the sound of it drawing closer. Shadows on the tracks, moving against the wind, too fast, too tall. A child's laughter from the empty waiting room, followed by weeping. Another entry dated nearly a century ago. They're waiting. Always waiting. For a train that never comes. The dates spanned decades, even generations, but the chilling consistency of the phenomena was stark, impossible to ignore. Orrin left as the last vestige of light faded from the sky, his hunched figure swallowed by the deepening gloom. The silence that descended was profound, heavy, broken only by the mournful, relentless wind. I logged my first entry, my hands steady despite the growing unease. November 1st, 2025, 1830. Ethan Reed, commencing duty, station secured. As I closed the ledger, a faint rhythmic clang started, emanating from the tracks outside. It was a faint metallic sound, like two pieces of metal striking each other at irregular intervals, growing subtly louder. I peered through a broken window, but the overgrown tracks stretched into the absolute darkness, empty and desolate. The first few hours dragged by. I checked the few flickering lights, swept dust into piles, and tried to distract myself with mundane tasks. But the clang from the tracks continued, a steady, maddening rhythm. Later, the clanging grew louder, accompanied by a mournful, drawn-out whistle that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. It sounded undeniably like an old steam engine, but there was no engine, no headlight, no movement visible, just the haunting, echoing sound permeating the very air of the empty station. I walked onto the platform, shining my flashlight down the tracks, but the beam cut through only the inky blackness, revealing nothing but rusted rails and tangled weeds. Then, an impossibly cold draft swept through the cavernous waiting room, bringing with it the faint scent of coal smoke, mixed with something else. Something sickly sweet and cloying, like wilting lilies. I could hear faint footsteps, light and quick, pattering across the cold stone floor of the waiting room, though no one was visible. They sounded like a child, running, then suddenly stopping, then starting again, almost playfully. I pressed myself against the cold, rough brick wall, my breath catching in my throat, forcing myself to stay silent, to observe, to listen to the impossible sounds of a phantom train, of phantom footsteps in the empty dark. Around 3 a.m., the air in the station grew inexplicably heavy, thick with an oppressive sense of sorrow and waiting. The scent of coal smoke intensified, mingling with that sickly, sweet, metallic tang that now felt like decay. The clanging on the tracks outside became a furious crescendo, accompanied by the shriek of metal on metal, the hiss of steam, and the grinding of massive wheels, as if a colossal, invisible train was hurtling towards the station, directly at me. The old clock on the waiting room wall, long since broken, its hands frozen at some forgotten hour, suddenly chimed 3 times, its ancient gears groaning with an impossible, tortured sound as it did so. Then the flickering lantern on the desk in the office, my only source of steady light, seemed to dim, and in the sudden, deeper gloom, I saw it. A faint, glowing apparition, shimmering like heat haze, slowly coalesced on the tracks outside, visible through the shattered window. It was a child, small and indistinct, wearing what looked like old-fashioned clothes, faint and translucent, yet undeniably there. As it slowly drifted closer, it seemed to grow more transparent, revealing the rusted tracks beneath. But its form was clear enough to see its arm lift, a tiny, spectral hand reaching out. The air around it vibrated with an intense, profound cold that felt like being plunged into icy water, and a faint, desperate whispering emanated from the spectral form, carried on the sudden, unnatural breeze. Wait for me. They left me. I'm still here. I stumbled backward, fumbling for the heavy wooden door to the office, slamming it shut, the sound echoing through the cavernous station like a gunshot. I pressed myself against the cold wood, heart hammering against my ribs, waiting, listening, until the phantom train sounds faded into nothing and the chilling cold dissipated, leaving only the profound silence and the lingering scent of smoke and old flowers. My career in biotech had imploded, a spectacular public failure that left me with nothing but a string of botched experiments, a mountain of student loan debt, and the burning shame of wasted ambition. The advertisement was a small, almost desperate plea tucked away in a specialist journal, practically an antique. Remote research assistant needed for geothermal anomaly project, confidential site. Desperate, I'd applied, figuring any subterranean work, no matter how obscure or isolated, was better than living in my car, staring at the shattered reflection of my former life. It was my last gamble, a descent into the earth itself. The facility was a nondescript steel door, rust-streaked and heavily bolted, set into the side of a remote, nameless mountain, somewhere deep in the Pacific Northwest. It was surrounded by a tangle of thick, primeval forest, trees so ancient they seemed to hunch under the weight of centuries. The air outside was damp and cool, carrying the rich, earthy scent of decaying leaves and wet soil. The door hissed open with a pneumatic sigh, revealing a long, sterile corridor, brightly lit but stretching into an oppressive gloom, the perspective distorting in the artificial light. The air inside was heavy, smelling faintly of ozone, old dust, and something vaguely metallic, like blood mixed with electricity. A man with a stern expression and closely cropped hair, his face as unyielding as the rock around us, stood at the end of the corridor, waiting. "You the new recruit?" he asked, his voice flat, devoid of warmth. His eyes, the color of cold steel, analyzing me with an unnerving, almost predatory intensity. "Yes, sir," I managed, my voice a little reedy, feeling the pressure in my ears as we descended, a dull ache behind my temples. "Nathan Price." He nodded, a curt, almost imperceptible gesture. "Dr. Thorne. This facility operates under strict protocols, Mr. Price. Deviations are not tolerated. The mountain, it has its own rules." He gestured towards a small, stark laboratory, its glass walls gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "Your duties are simple. Monitor the geothermal readings, log the data, maintain the equipment. Just listen to the Earth, Mr. Price, and it will tell you its secrets. Things it doesn't want known." His words hung in the air, a chilling premonition. The laboratory was a stark, brightly lit room, an antiseptic cube filled with blinking screens, humming machinery, and a constant low thrum that vibrated through the very floor. On a gleaming steel counter, a thick bound logbook lay open, its pages heavy, almost leathery to the touch. "Every researcher before you has kept this record," Dr. Thorne said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion as he tapped the cover. "Readings, anomalies, anything unusual. This mountain, it knows more than we do." I skimmed through entries, a cold dread beginning to seep into my bones. They started as meticulous scientific observations, but quickly spiraled into something far more disturbing. Low-frequency hum from Section C, not seismic. 100. Felt a pressure in my chest. Strange, pulsing light in the deepest borehole moved independently. Observed for 3 hours, no explanation. Echoes of a language I didn't recognize seemed to emanate from the core, like singing, but wrong. Another entry, scrawled in a shaky hand, almost illegible. "The dreams, they come from below. They show me things, the waking earth. It hungers." The dates spanned years, even decades, each entry more unsettling than the last, building a terrifying mosaic of persistent, inexplicable phenomena. Dr. Thorne departed, sealing the heavy steel door behind him with a resonant thud that echoed through the sterile silence, leaving me alone in the subterranean vault. The silence was profound, broken only by the constant, low thrumming of the facility and the faint, almost imperceptible groan of the mountain around me. I logged my first entry, my hand surprisingly steady despite the growing unease. November 1st, 2025, 1900 hours. Nathan Price, commencing duty. All systems nominal. As I closed the logbook, a faint rhythmic thrumming started, emanating not from the machinery, but from the very rock walls around me, growing in intensity until I could feel it vibrating through the floor, through the soles of my boots, into my bones. I pressed my ear to the cold steel wall, but heard only the internal thrumming, deep and unsettling, like a colossal heart beating deep within the earth. The first few hours passed in a disquieting routine. I checked the monitors, adjusted a few dials, noted the readings. But the thrum from the walls continued, a steady, maddening rhythm that seemed to penetrate my thoughts. Later, the thrumming intensified, becoming a low, resonant groan that seemed to come from deep within the earth itself. It sounded like something vast and ancient, shifting, stretching, awakening beneath the surface. I checked the monitors again, frantically, but the readings were stable, showing nothing out of the ordinary, even as the walls vibrated visibly. Then the lights in the lab began to flicker, rapidly, erratically, plunging the room into momentary darkness, then harsh illumination, casting grotesque, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe and contort on the sterile white walls, twisting the familiar into something monstrous. A strange, sickly sweet odor filled the air, like something blooming in the darkness, cloying and unsettling, mixed with the acrid scent of sulfur. I could hear faint, chitinous rustling sounds from the ventilation shafts, growing steadily louder, closer, as if something immense was scuttling through the narrow ducts, right above my head. I gripped the edge of the steel counter, my knuckles white, forcing myself to remain calm, to simply observe, to log the impossible sounds of something moving, awakening, beneath the earth. Around 3 a.m., the air in the facility grew thick, heavy with an oppressive, unnatural stillness that seemed to drain the very oxygen from the room. The thrumming from the walls became a deafening roar, shaking the very foundations of the lab, rattling the equipment, making the lights strobe wildly. The blinking lights on the monitors intensified, flickering so violently that they cast momentary bursts of pure, blinding white light, like silent explosions. Then, from the deepest borehole monitor, a faint shimmering light began to appear, growing brighter, resolving into a vague, bioluminescent form. It was a mass of shifting, interconnected tendrils, pulsating with an internal, sickly green light, slowly rising from the black depths of the earth, pushing its way up through the drill shaft. As it drifted closer, the temperature in the lab plummeted, ice crystals forming instantly on every surface. The glass walls, the monitors, even the condensation on my breath. And a profound, chilling silence fell, deeper than any silence I had ever known, broken only by the frantic crackle of static from the overtaxed equipment. The tendrils seemed to reach out towards the glass of the observation window, forming a single, desperate word in the rapidly forming frost on the monitor screen. Awaken. It was a plea, a warning, a declaration. I scrambled for the emergency shutdown button, my fingers numb, slamming the heavy steel door to the lab shut with a shuddering clang that echoed through the subterranean chamber. I huddled in the corner, pressing my hands over my mouth to stifle a scream, until the chilling cold dissipated and the monstrous thrumming subsided, leaving only the profound silence and the knowledge that something ancient and terrible had indeed awakened. And I was trapped, miles beneath the surface, with it. My journalistic career, once promising, had ended in a spectacular public disgrace. A botched exposé, a fabricated source. It had cost me my job, my reputation, and pretty much every personal connection I'd ever built. The dreams of breaking the next big story had dissolved into a bitter, echoing silence. The only lifeline I'd found was a cryptic, almost desperate flyer tacked to a damp community board in a northern city. Research assistant needed for Arctic Ice Core project. Remote location. Long-term assignment. Desperate, I'd packed my meager belongings, sold everything else, and flown north, hoping the sheer, desolate distance would somehow erase my past, bury it under leagues of ice and snow. It was my last refuge, a self-imposed exile at the edge of the world. The outpost was less a building and more a collection of prefabricated modules, like metallic cocoons, huddled together against a vast, blinding expanse of snow and ice. The wind, a constant, mournful presence, howled relentlessly, carrying with it fine, stinging particles of ice that scoured my skin. The air was impossibly cold, stripping the warmth from my lungs with each breath, a constant ache in my chest. I pushed open the outer airlock door, its heavy seal sighing as it broke, revealing a cramped, brightly lit interior. The air was bone dry and smelled faintly of ozone, recycled air, and something else. Something profoundly ancient, like frozen dust. A woman with keen, ice-blue eyes and a face weathered by the harsh, relentless climate, looked up from a console bathed in the soft glow of a dozen monitors. Her presence was as stark and unyielding as the landscape outside. "You're the new one, then?" she asked, her voice brisk, clear, cutting through the low hum of the machinery. "Yes, ma'am," I replied, my teeth chattering despite the layers of thermal clothing. "Alex Carter." She nodded curtly, a brief, almost imperceptible dip of her head. "Dr. Petrov, this is a demanding posting, Mr. Carter. The Arctic. It has its own secrets, and it keeps them well." She gestured towards a console filled with blinking lights, complex readouts scrolling across its screens. "Your duties are simple. Monitor the ice core readings, log the data, maintain the heating units. Just listen to the ice, Mr. Carter, and it will tell you its stories. Things we're only just beginning to comprehend." Her words, delivered with chilling calm, carried a weight that sent a shiver down my spine, deeper than any cold. As the endless twilight of the Arctic winter deepened, casting everything in a perpetual muted gray, Dr. Petrov explained my duties. She was a woman of few words, but every one of them was precise, carrying the authority of someone who had spent too long at the world's frozen edge. The main module was a compact space, filled with humming machinery, the soft glow of displays, and the comforting constant drone of the heating units. On a small, bolted-down desk, a thick, waterproof logbook lay open, its pages heavy, almost leathery to the touch, and surprisingly brittle with age. "Every assistant before you has kept this record," Dr. Petrov said, her voice devoid of inflection, as she tapped the cover with a gloved finger. "Readings, anomalies, anything unusual. This ice, it knows more than we do. Far more." I skimmed through entries, a growing sense of dread beginning to coil in my gut. They started as meticulous scientific observations, temperature fluctuations, geological data. But quickly, they devolved into something far more disturbing, scrawled in various hands, some neat, some frantic, some almost illegible. Faint drumming beneath the ice, not seismic. 2,300, vibrated the whole module, felt like a heartbeat. Shadows seen in the core sample shifted when observed. Not optical illusion, they moved. An old song, barely audible, coming from the depths of the borehole, like a lullaby, but wrong. So wrong. Another entry, dated nearly 50 years prior, scrawled wildly. "They're trying to get out. The ice is thin. We disturbed them. God help us." The dates spanned decades, even generations, each entry more unsettling than the last, building a terrifying mosaic of persistent, inexplicable phenomena lurking beneath the frozen surface. Dr. Petrov left as the final faint light of the endless twilight faded into absolute darkness, her departure marked by the hiss of the airlock sealing behind her. I was alone, truly alone, with the constant hum of the heaters and the mournful, relentless howl of the wind battering the thin walls of the module. I logged my first entry, my hand steady despite the growing unease. November 1st, 2025, 2000 hours. Alex Carter commencing duty, all systems nominal. As I closed the logbook, a faint rhythmic scratching began, emanating not from the wind, but from the very walls of the module, beneath the insulation, like something trying to claw its way in from the frozen wastes. Slowly, relentlessly. I pressed my ear to the cold, insulated wall, but heard only the scratching, persistent and unnerving, growing steadily louder. The first few hours dragged by in a disquieting routine. I checked the monitors, adjusted a few dials, noted the readings. But the scratching from the walls continued, a steady, maddening rhythm that seemed to penetrate my thoughts, to echo in my bones. Later, the scratching intensified, accompanied by a low, guttural moaning that seemed to rise from the depths of the ice itself. It was a sound like something immense and ancient, struggling in agony, or perhaps in a terrifying, slow awakening. I checked the temperature gauges, the seismic sensors, but everything was stable, no anomalies registered, even as the module vibrated subtly. Then the internal lights of the module began to flicker, rapidly, erratically, plunging the cramped space into momentary, terrifying darkness, then harsh, blinding illumination. The dancing shadows seemed to writhe and contort on the curved walls, twisting the familiar forms of the equipment into monstrous shapes, fleeting glimpses of something immense and distorted. A strange, earthy smell, like thawing permafrost and something ancient, something profoundly wrong, filled the air, acrid and cloying. I could hear faint, dragging sounds just outside the module, growing steadily louder, closer, as if something impossibly heavy was being pulled across the ice, just beyond the thin walls. I gripped the edge of the console, my knuckles white, my breath catching in my throat, forcing myself to remain rooted, to simply observe, to log the impossible sounds of something moving, stirring, out in the endless frozen white. Around 3 a.m., the air in the outpost grew heavy, thick with an oppressive, unnatural cold that seeped through the insulation as if the walls didn't exist, coating every surface in a fine, glittering layer of frost. The scratching and moaning from outside became a frantic, desperate crescendo, shaking the very structure of the module, rattling the bolted-down equipment. The flickering lights on the console intensified, shorting out intermittently, casting blinding flashes of pure, stark white, like silent explosions. Then, a faint bioluminescent glow began to seep through the small porthole window. A sickly, ethereal green, growing brighter, resolving into a vague, shifting form just outside. It was a mass of dark, indistinct shapes, writhing and twisting, pushing against the glass, and as it pressed closer, it left a trail of unnaturally fast-forming frost on the porthole. The frost coalesced into a single, desperate image. A crude, childlike drawing of a stick figure, its limbs long and thin, its arms outstretched in what could be a plea or a grasp, with a single, desperate word scrawled beneath it. Here. It wasn't just a drawing. It was a message, burned into the ice by something utterly alien. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum in the terrifying silence. I scrambled for the emergency seal on the porthole, my fingers numb with cold and terror, slamming it shut with a resounding thud that echoed through the confined space. I pressed myself against the cold, vibrating wall, pressing my hands over my mouth to stifle a scream, until the chilling cold dissipated and the monstrous sounds from outside faded, leaving only the profound silence and the chilling knowledge that something ancient and terrible had indeed been buried beneath the ice. And now, it was here.